I am Brendie Heter, and we've got Kim Fredrickson here. We've got a lot to cover. I'm going to email you the show notes to help you out because Kim's got a lot of great resources that she wants to share with you. And I don't want you to feel like you've got to be feverishly writing down notes. So I've collected all of that for you in advance, and I will email you a summary. So feel free to just relax, get a cup of coffee, listen to Kim, be encouraged by Kim, and don't feel like you've got to write everything down because I've got you covered. So let me get into why Kim and I want to do this, and then I'm going to introduce Kim and then let her start on some of the questions. So you guys know that this is a heavy topic. It's not an easy thing to do, and to talk about grief and to talk about a devastating loss. So whoever is out there right now, I'm really impressed with you because you have decided to give us 30 minutes and address something that's very painful. And so you guys are really brave, and I'm really impressed with you. So I just want to say that right up out the bat. So this is a heavy topic for me as well. I'm doing this because I lost my father when I was 9, and it changed me completely. And it changed how I grieve, and it changed how I watch other people grieve. And so this is something that it's not a fun thing to talk about, but it's super important. So I'm gonna not make you wait any longer. I want to introduce Kim. Let me give you my perspective of Kim, and then I'll let her introduce herself. I have known of Kim almost my entire life because Kim is my sister Betty's closest and dearest friend for years and years and years. And so Kim has been, giving counsel and giving wisdom to my sister, so it's been trickling down to me over the years. So I feel like I have gained and gleaned the resources of Kim's experience as a counselor, as an author, as a public speaker over the years. And so that's why I wanted to bring her to you guys. I want you to experience her calmness and her wisdom. So Kim, my first question for you, we're going to just jump in because this is a quick, short webinar, is you wrote 2 books, Give Yourself a Break, and then the next one, Give Your Kids a Break. And so my first question for you is, those were kind of written pretty close after one another. And the aim is, and correct me if I'm wrong, is being compassionate to yourself and to others when you've made mistakes, when you're experiencing grief, or generally when things aren't going well. So why did you write another book immediately after aimed at kids? Most of my audience is moms with young kids or single moms or widows. So that's kind of my demographic. Mm-hmm. So why did you write a book for parents immediately after?
Good question. Thank you. Yeah, so that book released a little less than a year ago, and I wrote it because you can tell, to those of you who don't know me, I have oxygen, and I have oxygen on because I just breathe extra charged oxygen. And I have that on because I have a disease called pulmonary fibrosis, which is actually, unfortunately, a terminal lung disease that I developed as a side effect from chemo and radiation for breast cancer. So my journey on this very difficult path started 5 years ago when I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And then I developed, like 4 days after I finished treatment for cancer, they found out I had this disease. And so it's been a really rough road. And so I personally know a lot about grief and about still enjoying life despite grief and getting through grief in healthy ways. And so the book came about. It's called Give Your Kids a Break, Parenting with Compassion for You and Your Children. And it's basically a way to help parents be compassionate with themselves and then teach their children to do so as well. But the reason I wrote it was not because I wanted necessarily to put a parenting book out into the world, although I'm super glad I did, but because I have 2 adult children, 29 and 30, and who don't have children themselves yet. So I don't have grandchildren yet, but someday I'm sure I will. And honestly, I was very, probably won't be here when they're around to help raise them. And so I wanted to leave them something to help them raise their children. And as I was writing it, I actually really liked it a lot. And I asked them if they would mind if I was only doing it for them, but if they would mind if I self-published it so that other people could enjoy it as well. And they said, sure. So that's how it happened. And I'm super glad. And I've had a great response, and I think very, very helpful.
So basically you took, you had 4 days break after
Yes.
you beat breast cancer, and then you got a terminal diagnosis. And so you took that pretty devastating blow and you wrote a book to help others. So
A couple years later, though, 3 years later. Okay, so it wasn't immediate. I've gone through lots of grief and change, but definitely want to use the time I have left for the best possible purpose. So that was the thing that God burdened me to do.
That's amazing.
I like to do, actually. So.
Well, on that note, so you understand grief in a few different layers. So let's just jump right into it. I think this question is mainly for me. We got this question a few different ways, but I personally have a hard time processing emotions.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of recoil at them from myself and others.
Mm-hmm.
When somebody is in my presence and they're really emotional, I tend to get overly hard because I am uncomfortable with emotion.
Right.
So my question for when I am in the presence of somebody else who's having emotions, or my children, how do I help them process emotions when I'm struggling with my own?
Yes, that's such a good one. And just so you know, and I'm going to sort of start with some basic teaching on emotions and processing them, because everyone on this call is feeling exactly how you are.
Right.
So processing emotions is hard for most people. And the reason is, it's a good reason. Very few of us have been taught how to process emotions and work through them in healthy ways. And so, including grief, but also all emotions. And most of us either ignore them, push them down, eventually explode when they all build up inside and they all come out. But we respond this way just because we haven't learned healthy ways to process our emotions. And honestly, we tend to repeat what we've learned growing up, even if it isn't effective. And it's just because it's the only way we know. Like, why would we do a different way if we don't know a different way?
It's a pattern.
It's a pattern. So in order to help a grieving friend or your children or your loved one, we have to sort of get to a somewhat okay place with emotion. I'm not even saying you have to be real healthy and totally comfortable, but I mean an okay place with emotions. And the way that I look at it is that God actually gave us emotions to guide us, almost like a GPS system. It tells us, where to go, what's going on, and danger, and go here and go there. And we can see emotions as valuable, that will really help and teach us rather than something to recoil from. And it helps us be compassionate with ourselves as well as with other people's emotions. And so a couple tips I would say is, when emotions come up, it's healthy to stop and listen instead of judging yourself for having them or push them away. And instead, step back and ask yourself some questions, almost like you would do with a friend. Like, what's going on inside of me? What message is this emotion telling me that I need to pay attention to? What can I do to address the problem that my emotions are telling me, like, this is a problem? And then how can I soothe and comfort myself in the moment? Most of us don't know how to help calm ourselves down and soothe ourselves. And so it's just super important to allow ourselves to have the emotion, even the upsetting ones, and then name them if possible, and then express them in ways that aren't hurtful to ourselves and others. That's where we get into trouble, is not the emotions themselves, but the way that we express them.
So what I heard you say is, just to summarize it, which I'm taking notes. I'm paying attention. So step back, name the emotions and express them.
Yes.
So it seems as though those are the healthy way to process.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
And what happens is when we do that, it actually calms our system down. The intensity, the emotion goes down, and it helps us move through emotions much quicker. So it's
When you do those
right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's imagine that's happened and you've done those 4 things.
Yeah.
And then now you're faced with, a friend who is experiencing a crushing loss.
Right.
And I guess maybe a question before that is, let's clarify what loss and grief could be, because there's other ways that people grieve. It's people think grief, they think death. So
Right.
what are some of the other less obvious ways that people could be grieving? I think it would help us as friends and as parents to acknowledge and to recognize other forms of grief.
I think that I love that question because as a counselor, I just want to say that I would say a hallmark of every single person who came in my office was that they had something they were grieving, and they didn't know it, but underneath whatever the thing was grief. So grief is essentially the process of going from what was to what is. There's been a loss, and we have to transition from how it used to be to how it is now. It's like adjusting to the new normal. And it's essential to both ourselves as well as our relationships to learn how to grieve through life's losses, the little ones, the big ones, disappointments, and tragedies. So I wanted to give some examples of how we grieve over large and small things. But I wanted to start with an experience that every single living human being has, which is our first grief experience. And that actually begins from the time that we're born. Believe it or not.
Okay.
Think about the baby inside. For the baby, not the mom who's totally cramped and hot and can't wait for the baby to come out. Okay, but for the baby, it's all nice and safe in there. All of our needs are met. We don't even have to ask to get fed. We're rocked all the time. Nobody changes our diaper. Like, it's just really nice in there. Although at the end, it gets a little bit crowded, right? But all of a sudden, in a moment, we get squished and we get squeezed, and we get pushed down this narrow opening into a bright light where someone smacks us on the bottom. And that's like, what a way is that to come into the world, right?
Yeah.
But we come from a really nurturing environment into a very harsh environment. And that's actually how we start grieving. And it continues as we grieve over small losses for kids, things like the top of their ice cream cone coming off on the ground, right? Or having to change teachers, or bigger things like moving, losing a friend, going through a crisis. And so every day for kids and for adults, honestly, is filled with small losses. For kids, getting time out, not being able to pick at recess, moving to a new school, your sibling gets a bigger piece of cake. I mean, those are all little grief experiences. And adults grieve too when things don't turn out the way we hoped, which is basically several times a day, right? I mean, that's how it is.
All day.
And one thing I wanted to mention, because I don't think most people know, that it's also very normal to feel a tinge of grief, even in good things. So for instance, if you think about getting married, I can be simultaneously excited about getting married, about this new direction in my life, but sad about giving up some freedoms that I had, but also greatly anticipate my new life. So there's always tinges of grief, even in good things. So for me, like, one of my secrets to getting through such difficult times is processing grief with compassion for myself and my faith, is honestly what has gotten me through all these hardships of life. And I feel like, this is based in my faith, but that grief is God's answer to processing all these deep disappointments and losses. And it feels like these emotions are so powerful and they can't possibly be good. It seems like something that we should run from, but they're the pathway to get from what was to what is, to be able to grieve through all the emotions.
It's fascinating, and we didn't talk about this part before. It's fascinating that you use that the night before your wedding,
Yeah.
think. The night before my wedding, I'm obviously excited and I'm thrilled, but I cried
Uh-huh.
because I was going to give up my last name.
Right.
And I
Right.
love my last name.
Yes.
And
Yes.
it felt like I was losing part of myself.
Yes.
Um,
Absolutely.
and it was something that I was kind of embarrassed about, because I was like, no,
Mhm.
I'm excited though.
Right. I want to get married.
Nobody freak out. I'm excited, but I was grieving and I
Mhm.
didn't know how to process it. It
Right.
wasn't until years later where I made a comment and another sister
Hmm.
said, me too. I cried the night before
Hmm.
my wedding, and the only reason
Yes.
was because of our last name.
Hmm.
And once we had that conversation, I felt better. And it was years later, and it was a hard
Good.
transition. So
Yeah.
I was grieving something I didn't even realize I was.
Right. And then it's confusing. And then you wonder, like, what's wrong with me? I want to get married. Like, you don't understand. But if you do understand, you go, well, that would make sense. On the
Right.
one hand, of course, I'm totally excited. But on the other hand, I do have some losses that go with this wonderful day. And
Yeah.
then you don't have to shame yourself or feel out of touch with yourself. So I'm so glad that you shared that, because those kind of things, even having another baby, you're so excited about another baby, but your second one, you're losing that special one-on-one with your first, right?
Yep.
And
Cried there
so,
too. Mhm.
and in the third, and then the fourth, and but
Yeah.
those are like normal things. That just means you're connected and attached. It's a good thing, actually. But if you don't know what it is, you feel terrible about
Yeah.
yourself, right?
That is true. So what do you say, and this is kind of why I wanted to do this. So
Yeah.
this question, I got it from a few different people. What do you say to someone who either has a child who's grieving in various ways? There could be layers of grief, but a child who's grieving, how do you get that child to start processing their emotions?
Right, right. So I'd like to answer it a little bit more generally about feelings in general, like sharing feelings with you, and then I can say more specific about grief, because they both apply. So kids need to know, kids feel feelings, but they don't know what they are, and they don't know how to express them or give words to them. And so they need us to do that. And so I have 4 steps for that. So it's actually a little similar to adults, but I would say the first thing is I would be buying books about feelings, and if there's a grief, I would buy some books about grieving, like in losing. They have books about things like that, losing a pet, losing a family member,
Mhm.
just loss in general. So, but the reason is I would just make that part of your reading time. And these books about feelings, they talk about anger and what it is, and sadness and what it is, all those kind of things. And because what will happen is it starts giving you and your children words to put on feelings. And then you can refer to the book. Oh, honey, I wonder if you're feeling like, Sammy in the book or something. You have a common way of talking about it. Because otherwise they just don't have, like, I'll give you an example. When our son was 2 and he was so angry about something, he was like bright red, and he was just, oh, and I said, Kurt, I think you're angry. And he goes, I'm not angry. And I said, really? Because people who are angry, like, they get all red and they go like this and they just feel like they're going to explode. And he goes, I'm angry, because he just didn't know what the word was. And so that's one thing, is just to first do some reading together about feelings. And then the second would be to help them label their emotions, because they just don't know what they are, and they need to understand the words that go with it. Because as you know, as everyone watching knows, their feelings come up intensely and quickly, and they can't label them, but they usually can pick from a list of emotions. So,
Hmm.
and I found this all by accident. So I have a possible conversation. Okay. So a parent might say, what you're going through is very hard. Are you feeling sad or anxious or confused or something else? And so one child will be able to recognize it, and they'll say, I feel sad. I'm not confused. Okay, that's good. And then you can keep talking. But let's say the other kid says the thing that they often say is, no, something else. And then you're like, oh my gosh, so what are the other ones? Okay. So then you say, are you feeling hopeless or hurt or frustrated or something else? I'm feeling hurt. Okay, so you're really hurt by what happened. that sounds really, really hard.
Hmm.
And then, what hurt the most? And so that would just be an example of if they can't say it, you could give them a list. And almost all kids can pick from that list. And as we help them label their emotions, we can help them learn to be compassionate. In other words, they can learn to be compassionate for the hard time they're having, or how hard it is to feel hurt. So that's number 2.
Okay.
And then number 3, which comes, oh, did you want to say something?
No, I'm taking notes.
Okay, that's fine. I just didn't want to interrupt you. Number 3 is then we need to express empathy to our children for their struggle.
Mm-hmm.
So, but really important question for you to ask yourself is, what would it be like to be my child in that situation? Not what it would be like to me in that situation. And so what you do is you think about your child and like their personality, their temperament, what they've been through, kind of who they are as a person. So I wanted to give an example because school is coming up, okay? So think about the first day of school for a child who's shy versus the first day of school for somebody who feels really comfortable with people and change. Super different experience. And so it's important to empathize according to who your child is and what they're like.
And those children are going to respond differently to the questions
Yes.
that you asked earlier.
Yes, they will. They will. Yes, they will, because they're a different kind of kid, right?
Yeah.
So you basically want to validate their experience and not shut them down. Like, don't give them a pep talk that invalidates their feelings.
Okay.
For instance, I wouldn't say, if they say, oh, so hard because I don't have any friends, I wouldn't say, and even if it's true, I wouldn't say, oh, but honey, in a week you'll have friends, or, it's not that big a deal, and, people like you. I mean, that's what we say to try to encourage them, but what it does is it shuts down their feelings, and what happens on the inside, they go, I'm not talking to you about this again, forget it. So instead you say, I'm really sorry, that's got to be so hard to show up at school and not see friends like you did last year, and that must have been really hard. What was the hardest part? And so you can just go with it, and then they will open up to you.
Right.
Which is super important. And so then number 4 is to reflect their feelings back in an empathetic way, just letting them know you heard them, kind of like what I said. So this is a more generalized comment, but that was really hard for you. You were really feeling afraid, or maybe it's embarrassed or angry or whatever it is. You've put in the emotion. You wish that hadn't happened, or you wish your friend hadn't been mean to you at school. And so when kids tell you a story about a hard time they're having, and they're met with a listening and empathetic ear, their feelings actually go down. So this conversation starts at an 8 out of 10, but as they really feel heard and listened to, it goes down to like 3. And it's because, number 1, they understand their feelings. They realize that feelings are normal, and mommy cares or daddy cares, and they don't feel alone in their pain, and they calm down more quickly. So that's true with, adults as well, but with children especially.
Well, and if you're getting used to asking yourself those questions, the stop, step back, name, and express, then you're going to be able to reverse that to somebody else and your children.
It's just it's not really a formula. I would just say it's a good way of relating as a caring person.
Yeah.
I would put it. And then with grief, I would be asking similar questions, just of like, how are you doing with grandpa not here anymore? Grandpa died. And just ask, I would say, what do you miss the most? And what are some of your favorite memories? Those kinds of things.
So if we take that grief and we put that to an adult.
Yeah.
I would say a lot of people, if parents have a hard time asking their kids these questions, it is substantially more difficult asking an adult, a close friend, a family member who's experienced a crushing loss. And I use that word crushing because I feel that that's what grief is sometimes. I mean, you're not just experiencing grief. It's crushing you. It is taking the life and the breath out of you. And when you're looking at somebody in the eyes who's had a child who's passed away, a loss of a marriage, a loss of health,
Mm-hmm.
We tend to freeze up.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So how do we talk to a friend who's
Sure.
experiencing these things, and particularly maybe what not to say?
Yeah, right.
Because I feel like because people are so worried about saying the wrong things, that
Mm-hmm.
they don't say anything.
Right.
And then there's
Right.
the other camp of people who just want to talk, and they end up saying things that are
Oh,
really, really hurtful, not
oh,
on purpose. So I feel like there's two camps. There's the people who talk a lot because they
yeah.
want to just help, 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 and they say
Yes.
hurtful things. There's the people who recognize they could say hurtful things and
Mhm.
don't say anything.
Right. Right.
So how do we get in the middle?
Yeah, absolutely. So first I would say that's such a normal thing. And I bet everyone on this webinar has had that both of those experiences, right? I certainly have, where I've been on the end where people aren't saying anything about something devastating. I feel like they don't care. And then I've been on the other end where I'm like, what do you say to a person in that
Yeah.
situation? Like, I have no idea. So the first thing I want to say is to take the pressure off of yourself to say the right thing. Because
Okay.
the reality is, and this is actually good news, it won't sound like it, but it is that when there's a tragedy, there are no perfect words to say that will make your friend's loss okay. They don't exist. The person just went through devastation. Their life will never be the same. It doesn't mean it can't eventually take a different turn and have good parts. So it doesn't mean that at all. But their life's not going to be ever the same in the same way, and you're not going to be able to say something that will alleviate their suffering at that moment. Now that doesn't mean, well, therefore, gosh, too bad. No, it means what does make a difference though is knowing that your loved ones and your friends feel terrible with you, that they get the degree of what's happened, because what it does is it helps you feel not so alone, and it validates what a horrible loss has happened. So I came up with, I really thought about this ahead of time, and I came up with a few things you could say. See, I think what happens is we expect ourselves to somehow know this. And number
Yeah.
one, you've never been through it, so why would you?
Right.
Number two, let's say you have, but it affects everybody differently, right? So even if you've been through it, doesn't mean the other person will feel the way you did. So what I came up with a few things. One is like, I feel so horrible about what has happened. I have no idea what to say to you, but know that I love you and I'm praying for you. And see what that does. Like, to me, that validates, that says this person understands what I'm going through is so awful that they, even though they love me, they can't figure out the perfect words to say. Of course, there aren't any. And that would be validating to me, to know that you get how bad this is. See, it's hurtful when someone, let's say you've had a loss on a scale of 1 to 10, it's a 10, and someone treats it like a 2, you know?
Right.
Like, I remember my first pregnancy was a miscarriage, and I was devastated. I just grieved and grieved and grieved. And I remember once I was in the grocery store right afterwards, and I ran into someone from our church, and I seriously know she meant well. I really do. But she just said, "I'm so sorry, what happened? You know, my cat died last week." And I know that she was trying to connect with, you have somebody, something precious you're connected to has died. It's very painful. But inside I was like, oh my God.
Yeah, that's not helpful.
But I did know she meant well. So, I mean, but that's one thing. It's just to say, you know, another would be to say, I want to help, but I don't know what you need. And then offer options like, I can listen, I can hold you and cry together. I can make you meals, I can clean your house, I can do your laundry, or anything else that you need. What would help? And sometimes a person is so besieged with grief, they can't pick from even a list. They don't know. And they say, I don't know. You say, I can see why you can't even pick. You're so devastated. You can't even think about things like that. But just know that I love you and I care, and I know that there's not words for how difficult this is. Could I call you tomorrow, or could I call you in a couple of days? Just to keep the connection up. And then another one, it would be to just say things like, you know, I'd love to come by and just take a walk. You know, would you like to do that? And if so, when? Or I'd be happy to pick up your kids or groceries or, you know, those kinds of things. And then you can send cards and texts. And the point of it all is to keep connected.
Okay.
And to let your friends know that you remember them, you remember what they've been through, and they feel connected and loved after a tragedy. And that's the one thing that will really, really help. Don't say, because I've had people say this to me before, and again, I understand it's very well meaning. I've had people say, let me know if you need something. And I know that they really mean it. I do. But the problem is when you're grieving, you can't think of anything. You don't have the energy to call them, to ask for help. I mean, there's just no way. So it's actually better in general that it's better to ask. Like, don't expect yourself to know. Ask.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I wasn't necessarily planning on sharing these, but one of the tips that two things that I do when somebody close to me is drowning or crushed by grief, I tend to send a text, but then end it with, please don't respond. Because I think that there's a pressure, because I know that other people are reaching out in various capacities.
Right.
And I don't want them to feel like I've given them an errand. I need to respond to all of these people. And I think that's our mindset of, it's another thing I have to do. I have to respond to this person.
Yes.
I just said, I'm thinking about you. I'm praying for you. This is specifically how I prayed. And I don't want you to feel the pressure to respond to me.
Yes.
Because I don't want to give you that.
Right.
The other thing that I tend to do, if this helps anybody listening, is I tend to try to find the dates that are coming up that might be painful.
Yes.
So if I know somebody whose child has passed away, an anniversary that is maybe no longer celebrated,
right,
a marriage failing, or a death, that person, or a deceased person's birthday,
right,
I will put those actually into my calendar so that I know that it's coming up.
Yes.
Because I remember as a child who was grieving, everybody is right there, right after.
At the beginning, right?
At the beginning of the pain, everybody's there. And slowly everything kind of goes back to normal.
Right.
And my family was here, crumbled.
Yes.
And then people went away. They forgot. And that's natural.
Right.
Life goes on, things change. And so there's not bitterness there. But I remember feeling like nobody remembered that today was his birthday.
Yeah.
Nobody remembered that this was the day that he passed. Our immediate family does.
Right.
It was helpful for me when other people acknowledged that day.
It's huge.
So that's
what did that say to you? What did that say to you when other people acknowledged it?
It validated his life. So I'm specifically talking about my father's life.
Yeah.
So there's a deep, especially as a child. So now I'm talking as a child. You are so terrified of forgetting the parent and forgetting what they looked like. And this is before pictures and videos were everywhere. So you're so scared as a child of forgetting what they look like and forgetting them. That when other people don't even acknowledge them on important days, it felt like forgotten.
Absolutely.
And when somebody said, I know this was the date that he passed, or I'm thinking about you on Father's Day.
Yeah. Oh.
I'm thinking about you on this day. It meant the world to me because they remembered that I was hurting.
Right. Absolutely.
And they remembered him. So he wasn't forgotten.
Right.
So that's something that I know that when people did that to me as a little girl, that's why I make it a point.
Right.
To send those reminders on those days. And it may be, you may have to be super purposeful about that and send a reminder, because I would forget.
Right. It's nice we have reminders now. I mean, on our phone, it's pretty easy to do now.
Very easy. So I hope that was didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I loved it.
I had done.
I thought it was great. Super good.
So So then so the other wrong things to say, do you have anything else you want to end at? Because maybe we can
Yeah.
just focus, if people leave this with anything, maybe we just don't say these things.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, and by the way, I sent Brendie a name of a book that helps for adults, helping to be a good friend to people who are grieving. And I'm going to read a few from the book. So just not say, you'll get over this soon, or yeah, let me know how I can help sometime. At least now you can put this behind you and get on with your life.
Oh,
That horrible.
I think I have heard that.
Have you? I know. And I think, again, people are well intentioned, but that is so like,
That's very painful.
it's damaging, unhelpful, painful, fill in
All of it.
all the blanks. You have no right to be angry with God. It's it was in his will, those kind of spiritual things that, we can even know that in God's bigger plan, all of that stuff, but super unhelpful to a person when they're in the throes of grief.
Yeah, and again, it doesn't necessarily have to be with death. I had a friend who whose husband was in a massive car accident and became paralyzed.
Wow.
And it was a grief. There was obviously grief of the pain that was happening physically, but there was the loss of dreams, the loss of the ability to have children, so many layers of loss.
Yeah.
And people kept saying things like, this is all in part of God's plan, and this is God will make this work. And again, as a evangelical Christian, I believe that. But that is not necessarily helpful to say to somebody who is experiencing something that we don't understand.
Right. And I think I would go with that, is that the other reason it's not helpful is people say that because they are uncomfortable with the emotions. In other words, they say that so now we can stop talking about this. In other words, it isn't actually, it's helpful to the person who's saying it because they're uncomfortable.
Yeah.
It's not helpful to the person who's grieving.
No. Well, and it's a filler. I feel like it's a filler thing to say when it's awkward, and then you just say, God has a plan. And that's not helpful for me.
Yeah.
And I remember as a little girl, again, speaking as a child grieving, being angry at adults who would say that flippantly, because I was like, well, I don't like that plan.
Right, exactly.
And as a little child, I didn't have as many barriers, so I would say that.
Sure. Probably good you did.
Well, I don't like that. And I don't like that plan. And I don't like God's plan. And it's a terrible plan.
Right.
So maybe more people should say that, but it is not helpful on that end. So are there any other ones for that book, or anything you want to add to that?
I think I would if I could just give a personal thing, with all that I'm going through, like, this is pretty lame, pretty tough thing I'm going through. And I just allowed myself to grieve and feel terrible and loss, and through waves and waves of grief over different things. And I eventually got to the place where I could see it as something that God allowed in my life. I didn't feel like he caused it. And now it's been 5 years since I was diagnosed with cancer. And I actually feel like God is opening up a new ministry to me of actually ministering to patients that are just like me, that have the same disease. So I would never in a million years say that I'm glad it happened, but it feels good to be able to use the tragedy for good. But realize it's been 5 years.
Yeah.
So, it takes a long time to grieve really, really difficult things, and it's supposed to, because it's kind of like this, like, however attached you were to either a person or a dream, like, if you're really attached, it's going to take that long to grieve. If it's a small thing, it'll only take a little while. Right. But if you're really, really invested, or like the friend you mentioned there's layers and layers and layers of grief that came from this, his accident, like, you're going to keep having those kinds of griefs, the times of grief, and you just need to let them be there and be kind to yourself. That's the biggest thing. Be kind to yourself about your emotions, and help your friends to be kind to themselves too. Like, just validate anybody would feel this way, and this is so awful, and you can't even imagine how you could ever feel good again. And that makes perfect sense. But I'm right here with you, and I'm going to walk with you through this. And you just validate their very, very normal feelings, and then over time they work through them and things are better. And at the time you couldn't even imagine even feeling slightly less bad than you do.
Yeah.
But eventually, unless you get stuck, you do.
Well, and on that note, if we have people who are stuck, who feel stuck, who don't know how to even ask these questions, I really want to encourage you to pick up Kim's book, and I'll put that in the show notes. But give yourself a break and give your kids a break. And I know that there's a lot of people who are going to be watching this on the recording and later on Facebook. And I want to just encourage you, for wherever you are, whatever stage you are in grief, and it comes in waves, right? Good days and bad days, that, do reach out when you need help, and get resources like Kim's book. And she has given me a list of great books for parents who are trying to help their children or try to help a friend. There's a lot of great resources out there, and there's no reason for you to try to do it yourself.
Right.
And
you can't.
You cannot do it yourself. And I love, again, if you take one thing away from this, is there are no perfect words.
No.
They don't exist. And that's what Kim said a few minutes ago. They don't exist. So take that burden off of yourself if you're trying to carry somebody else's weight for them. Those words aren't there, but
your love is there, and that needs to be communicated.
Yeah. So, and your presence and you being there is important. So
absolutely.
With that, we told people it would be 30 minutes, and we're closer to 40 or 50. So I don't want to go any longer, but I'm really grateful for you guys who stuck around and joined us, and those who watch this later on the recording. Please visit Kim on kimfredrickson.com. And again, I'll put that all on the show notes. But thank you so much, Kim. I am so grateful.
Thank you for having me, Brendie. It's so fun.
I'm so glad that you did this and you carved out your time to do this for my audience and for my listeners.
Absolutely. My pleasure.
So thank you so much.
Okay.
Bye-bye. All right, bye guys.